Thank you for joining us up here this afternoon. My name is Mark Johnson. I am the community editor at The Economist, where I worry about things like social media and set the moderation policies for comments on our website. I'm also the Internet and Society correspondent, so I write about technology, politics, and international relations. Welcome to our panel on comments on news sites. For centuries, public discourse has been something that happens in public spaces like parks, streets, town halls. Now, as that discussion has moved online, it increasingly takes place in spaces that are owned and controlled by private firms. Now, that's obviously web giants like Facebook and Google, but it is, of course, also the many thousands of smaller sites that allow online discussion, very many of those news sites. Now, reader participation is an enormous opportunity for news firms to expand and to strengthen the role they play in informing, entertaining, and criticizing the citizens and the authorities where they operate. But reader participation can also mean cost, liability, and brand damage as well. I recently read one journalist describing the act of reading comments alongside news articles as like eating a juicy steak with a side order of maggots. So, given that, how can news sites make the best of reader comments? How can they manage them while protecting their contributors' right to free speech? And what should governments do and not do to help them in that task? Those are the topics of our discussions today, and I'm joined by five distinguished panelists whose names my lame English tongue is about to butcher. But to my right we have Ester Zilinskina, Director of Communications at Delphi, a web portal in Vilnius and several other Nordic states. Andre Richter, the Director of the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media. To my left, Sarah Yassin, Editorial Assistant at Index on Censorship. Mina Haag Nærland, journalist and online opinion editor at Aftenposten, a Norwegian newspaper. And at the end, Dainius Radzivicius, chairman of the Lithuanian Journalists Union. So we will try and keep this lively and speedy. It's the end of the day and drinks await later. And I'm going to start by throwing it down to the right-hand side to ask Ester, tell me why you use comments on your websites, what value they give and what challenges they present.
Good evening. Thank you for a very good question about the value of the comments, because most often when we talk in the public sphere about the comments, we focus on the negative aspects of this issue, about the hate speech, personal insults, curses, and other things we can meet in the comment sites. But one day when we in the Baltic states, in the biggest news portals, counted the statistics, how many comments we find which are worth to being taken off from the public pages because they present hate speech or criminal, violent, not ethical talks, we sum up that it's only about 8% of all written 10,000 comments per day. So it's a very little statistics, a very little numbers that we are talking all the time about in the public sphere, but we're not talking about other 90% of readers created comments, which generates value to the media itself and to the society itself. So today I want to stress what value comments gives to the media, why it hosts it, and why it works so hard to protect readers from the government, politicians, and businessmen who want to know the real IP addresses, the real names of the people who write critical comments. First of all, I want to mention that comments feature is one of the main things that gave me online media success, trust of the readers, and credibility. First of all, the thing that led people to react quickly to every subject, not being afraid of what your boss boss at work, your family members, your friends and co-workers will say about what you think, the ability to write your real opinion gave online media the success. Readers felt themselves important. They could react really to the things what's going on in the public sphere. And 10 years ago, when the comments pages was the best times of the comments in the Baltic states and other post-Soviet Union countries, where newspapers, print newspapers, printed articles from readers' comments, from readers' opinions. They looked at the actual articles on actual subjects and looked through what are the opinions of them and created from that articles in the print media. People felt themselves that they are important. Their opinion may mean something. They are heard. People in the comment sites in online media started to organize themselves in the protest actions against or for some political solutions, and politicians reacted to people's things they do in the comment sphere. People started organizing themselves, started gathering signatures for petitions for some things in comment sites, and these petitions were given also to the government for or against some solutions. So ability to give readers comments, they took society an ability to participate in real public sphere life. Not only politicians, not only businessmen, not only journalists can create a public sphere and the solutions that all the people can take in their real lives. It made all the society the co-worker in the public sphere. Another thing I want to say why it is good and worth that people started to cooperate with journalists. They became the co-workers in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. We have a lot of situations when people in the comments write where some people who made crimes, where we can find them, much more details about the important actions, and journalists and police, they were looking through this information and helped to make actions in very important issues. So comments are a very important thing, not only to the media, but to the society for itself. Because of this freedom of speech, of this ability to react to every news, to write the opinion you really think, because all the comments in the Baltic states, they are anonymous, and readers mostly comment anonymously. This always gives the reaction of politicians who are not happy seeing critical opinions about them, about their solutions, and we had many, I can say now that many cases when politicians wanted to suggested the laws by which they suggested that responsibility for the content of anonymous comments should be taken by the news websites. I counted even 4 times such suggestions of the law, and all the time we had discussions, live discussions with politicians, and thanks God these laws hadn't been taken for real life. We even had interesting cases when the mayor of Vilnius asked the public prosecutors to seize all biggest news website servers just to get the IP addresses and to see who concretely is writing comments on him. We also take this to the public sphere and write it about his intentions, and didn't give the IP addresses to the public prosecutors and fight it for readers' right for expression and for their right to be anonymous when they want to express their real opinion, ethical opinion. Another interesting thing that we have in Estonia, that one businessman fighted also with the comment writer who insulted him, as he thinks, in the comments, and the Supreme Court in Estonia told that the news portal must take responsibility for this comment. So now we have this case in the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, and we'll see what will be the final solution in the future. The thing telling these examples, I want to mention that readers' comments create much more value to the media, to the journalists, and to the society itself than it do harm. And sometimes we forgot about that when we are mentioning the hate speech or other things, that it has bad things near it. And another figure I want to mention is that the statistics often shows that on an important articles on an actual themes, we see often that the comments of the readers on the subject are often read much more than the article itself. So it means that journalist has people think that they have opinion on their own. They can share their own opinion in the media. Media just only has to give readers a hint, an actual hint, and the readers are interested not in what only journalists say, they are interested in what people are thinking on actual themes. So that's why readers' comments are a really important tool in online media.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions for you based on that. Delphi is in 3 states, is that correct? In Estonia, in Lithuania?
Yes, and in Ukraine.
And in the Ukraine. Now, do you find that in each of those countries, the legal environment in which you work is similar? Do you find that there are some countries, politicians in some places, that are more troublesome for you than others?
In the Baltic state, the situation is the same, according to the online media. We all survived the same problems, according to the comments issue. Because when we started our business in all the Baltic states, we started at first with the comments ability, with the reaction of the people ability, and in all countries we received proposals from the parliaments, from the governments about the responsibility of the comments, about the ability to know who is writing all the critical opinion.
Now, are all of your comments anonymously written?
Most, because people can, nowadays people can choose. They can write with their real name and they can write anonymously. But I want to mention the situation 15 years ago when we started in the market. 99% were anonymous comments. If we see the situation now, 15 years later, I can say that about 30% now people are writing with their own names. And nowadays, most comments in news websites in the Baltic states, they are connected with the Facebook profile or the Twitter profile of the person. So when people publish comment, it also appears on the Facebook wall by its real name. And what we see, the tendency, the trends, that people now are not afraid so much to write on their own with their own names, with a real profile, the critical opinion. So we see that the things are changing in this sphere.
Because anonymity of commenters is a big issue in the news industry, of course, at the moment, especially with lots of firms deciding that conversations would be better if they either encouraged or enforced commenters to use their real names. So I just wanted to ask whether you had an opinion on that. Would you prefer it if your commenters chose to use their real names?
Yes.
Would the conversations be better?
We, even all news websites in Lithuania, we united our forces, and we all in the comment area in our news websites, we encourage people to use their own real names and real profiles. Just the discussion to be more concrete, more ethic, and so on and so on. And we see the tendency for we see the trend that people are really selecting it, because a lot of famous persons, like famous politicians, opinion makers, they discuss with readers who are commenting on the articles, writing their real name, and it encourages the readers also to write the response with their real name.
In terms of defamation, if a leading political figure is allegedly defamed by a commenter in your community, do you not think it's fair that they should be allowed to take action against the individual?
So they should discuss it with the individual who writes this comment, not with the news portal who gives a platform for it.
And at the moment, are you compelled to give the names of the people that make the comments?
We co-work with the prosecutors, but in every case we see, are they asking for the IP addresses or other technical data, because there's a real reason, for example, that that person write something that law prohibits, or because we often see that they are asking just for the case the person writes nothing bad, they just want to know the real facts, the AP who is having a critical opinion. So we see, most often we cooperate and give to the prosecutors or to the police workers the AP addresses, but sometimes not if we think that this case may be just for the finding out who is the author, not because he writes something bad.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stay in Lithuania and go over to Danis. Aista works for an online news portal, a sort of born digital organization that has this in its DNA. And you represent journalists from a much broader range of newspapers. And I wanted to know whether the rest of the news industry is similarly enthusiastic about comments and how they deal with it.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to say maybe first thing which are very interesting for me and very important. Comments shows for me as for journalists quality of journalism very often, because if you look at the quality of journalism nowadays, you can see how often we have very subjective journalism and journalists which are more related to do not really journalism, but sometimes provide some, conflicts for society, some scandals. And usually, if you look at the comments, we can see how bad or good are quality, according to two types of journalism. And I would like to say, for journalists, it's a very good indicator sometimes, just to evaluate your business or your content, because sometimes you can see how many comments you can just see on one short story or short message about something not very important, but very important for people if you speak about emotional issues. And people are commenting just, I like or dislike with things. I hate somebody or I love somebody. And the number sometimes just shows how many people are interested in these topics, but not really interested in comments and in quality of information. Sometimes we can see also stories which are very interesting and very good in quality, but nobody put it comments because all facts, arguments are inside content. Sometimes some people, they put some new facts and arguments, and it's a very good thing for editor just to see and monitor how good or bad was journalism. In this case, did he investigate it very indeed or just, copy-paste journalism with it. And I guess if we speak about problems of comments, it's just question about very concrete stories and concrete cases, because comments which are related to emotional, to feelings of society, they just have, sometimes, I don't know, maybe some dispute to need something like that or not. Some politicians and lawyers says we don't need, to disturb society about some conflict issues, about some, problematic issues, and maybe we don't need such comments because if you see like thousands of comments who supported or dislike something, it can be manipulating, for some politicians and so on, and it can be dangerous. But I guess such type of arguments, it's not good thing, because people, they will find way how they will debate on these issues. And maybe not only debate, but they can act. And sometimes, in the very beginning of some problems, if we need some solutions, I guess we need some debates, some discussions, and some comments of society. But if we have thousands of comments, we need somebody who will moderate, not just to leave, especially journalists who was out of his, for example, article or I don't know, comment. And if he see how active people are, he can be moderator, or maybe somebody outside the story. And this is also quality of journalism, of editorial, of policy of editorial. Do we provide something more about all these activities, or just leave like, okay, it's just not my business. We need just likes or dislikes, we need just activity, and we don't care about content. And I guess for journalism it's a very important issue. It helps us as for journalists, and we have a lot of opportunities how we can use comments of society. Yeah,
is there a consensus about how comments should be moderated? Do you get the impression that Lithuanian organizations are using a variety of different ways? Are some of them not moderating at all?
As I know, we have different experience, but the biggest news portals, they have special editors for comments, but also journalists who are authors of these articles, they usually also follow all these things. And as I know, also some legal institutions, in some cases, also have some interest just to look to all these fields. And also society. Also society, it helps usually if you have big stories and interesting comments, new facts, for example, arguments about concrete people, concrete situations. A lot of people, they just are reacting. And if it is not true, they react very quick in our country. And if somebody will put a very negative issue about, I don't know, some minorities, 10 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago even, we had like more people who support such kind of information. Now we have more people who are reacting and who are against such position, for example, about, I don't know, national minorities or sexual minorities. When we have more reaction negative, nowadays we have also more people who are in opposite, you know, just supporting some ideas, some others. And I guess that's why it's okay just to keep this system of debates, not just put some propaganda from on our side, but just to keep us like discourse, you know, like debate system, not like just providing some content.
There's no doubt that comments on websites have been a big boon for free speech, but they're not in the long term in the interests of journalism unless they help news organizations make money, especially when so many are facing tough times. Do you think that comments on sites are good for the business that keeps them?
Yeah,
keeps
for
them
sure. It's good part for business, but also I guess it's not helps only to provide and to make property, but also helps for society in some cases. Because I used to be TV journalist some years ago. I remember if you need Vox Populi, you need to go somewhere outside your office just for 1 hour and just somehow to collect interesting positions or opinions for people. And it's hard work, you know, sometimes. And if you have pet fever or something like that, you cannot do it very quickly. In internet, it is more easy. And it helps for society, for journalists, for people just to provide more opinions, more different arguments from society. I guess it really helps for business, for society, for quality of discussions and so on and so on. But we need some kind of moderation. That's why we need professionals. That's why.
Thank you very much. We've had some examples of the sort of the practice of reader comments. I'd like to go to Andrei now, who's been following the legal situation in Russia especially. Yeah.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to make a disclaimer. I'm speaking, as you can see, not as director of the office, and all views are mine, all mistakes are mine, and not of the Office of the Representative of Freedom of the Media. It's not, we don't want to make any political statements on comments on the site, on the websites. I would like to explain to you, try to explain to you the situation with the legal regulation of comments online in Russia. And the study is published in the Social Media Guidebook, which is available in Russian and in English on the second floor. So it's one of the points of my presentation is to encourage you to take the book and read the article, which is one of the longest there. I'll try to make in 5 minutes what is written on 25 pages there. Before I start, I understand that many of you are not familiar with the legal regulation of media in Russia or in some of the neighboring countries. Just 2 or 3 points which are of more general character. We in Russia make a very strong distinction, legal distinction between media and not media. Mass media, as we say, and not mass media. And speaking of internet, it becomes very important because if your website wants to be regulated by media law, and in many cases you do want to be regulated by media law because of the privileges for the media, privileges for the journalists, etc., you ought to be registered as such, as a media outlet with a special authority, governmental authority. And as of today, there are about 7,000 media outlets online in Russian Federation. Second, if you are registered as a media online, then, and you are governed, as I said, by the law on mass media, the authority which registered you, which has registered you, becomes the authority which controls you from the point of view of the way you follow the media law, media legislation. So, out of hundreds of thousands of websites, there are 7,000 websites which consider themselves as mass media online, and the state recognizes them as such. Almost all of them have forums which allow readers to leave comments. It's a crucial element of the website, mostly to attract new readers and to raise trust to the media outlet. Until 2010, almost all of them were pre-moderated, all of the forums, mostly because of the legal problems that arise out of the commentaries. The registration authority, the control authority, believed that all the comments left on the website of a media outlet are part of the media content, and as such, the editors should be held responsible for the comments as such. In 2010, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation made a resolution on media law of the first time in the history of Russian law, and it touched the issue of such comments. It was quite important for the freedom of the media, for the whole resolution, but also this part. The Supreme Court said that in those cases when there is no pre-moderation of the websites of the registered online media, the editorial offices, the editors, are not responsible for the content of the comments left, and they will stay, I mean, the privilege of the editorial office arises, but it is, the privilege exists only until and unless the registration authority, the governmental authority, issues a special letter to the editors and says, look, in the commentaries left on your websites, there is a violation of the media law. The power, such power was given to the registration authority, Roskomnadzor in Russian, and to the prosecutor's office. If the editors follow the request, and it is really a request, from the governmental authority or the prosecution, and remove or edit the comment, then they still have, there is no liability for the editors. If they don't do it, then the liability is that of the editors, and they might be liable for violation of the media legislation, which might lead, by the end of the day, to the closure of the media outlet. So that was the point of the Supreme Court. That was the interpretation of the Supreme Court of the current media law. And as I said, it was quite important. It was made in 2010. In 2011, the Roskomnadzor issued 177 requests of such kind to online media in Russia, which means that in 177 cases, the editors had the ability to decide whether they want to edit or remove the comment, or they don't want, and are ready to dispute with the state authorities on the legality of the comments left on the website. And there were 177 less cases for the authority to go against the editor's office in an administrative way. The most important thing is that violation of the media law has nothing to do with defamation. Violation of media law has to do with such things as state secrets, terrorism, incitement to terrorism, hate speech, violent propaganda of violence, and propaganda of pornography. Quite a limited number, relatively limited number of issues. Most of the cases which the court system deals with are defamation cases in relation to the media. So it was interesting, and the resolution didn't say anything about defamation or privacy, quite important violations which do happen online in the comments. So the Supreme Court decided not to deal with this issue. But the Russian courts cannot say we don't want to deal with this issue. They have to deal with these issues. And the only legal basis for the Russian courts to interpret how to deal with such issues was this resolution, and how to implement this resolution in relation to the violation of the media law to much more often cases of defamation and cases of violation of privacy in the comments online. I try to analyze the case law of the Russian Federation. It's now more or less possible because most of the decisions are online, and I could find 5 rules which are more or less govern the Russian courts in dealing with defamation and violation of privacy in the comments online. Many Russian courts, we don't have precedent law, so we cannot speak about a rule which is 100% proof. We can speak about tendencies in such a case, of course. Many Russian courts believe that because the editors are not liable for violation of media law unless there is a request from Roskomnadzor or the prosecution office on the violation of media law, they should not also be held liable for violation of defamation or for defamation or for violation of privacy unless there is an intervention from the state authorities or the prosecution office. But the state authorities and the prosecution office have no right to intervene in such cases. The state authorities do not intervene in defamation. It's a civil case. Therefore, the courts put the decision of the Supreme Court to a quite different sphere, but in a quite liberal way for the media organizations, of course. Second rule says that in case the defamatory material, the defamatory comments are removed by the editors themselves as part of the dealings with the person who was defamed in correspondence, or because of the court proceedings or before the court proceedings, then the lawsuit on defamation should be recognized null and void. The case should be thrown away. There is no uniform position as to the right to refute. In some cases, the court says that although the editors should not be held liable and no issue of moral damages can be raised, still the editors might be obliged to put the refutation on the defamatory remarks, or next to the defamatory remarks. But most of the decisions of the courts, which I saw, speak of a different approach to that. They say because they are comments, they are statements of opinion, and as such, they cannot be proven as true or false, and the person who believes he is defamed by those comments has the right to approach himself and leave his comments in his defense on the website of the online media. So the editors are not responsible to help him put this refutation or to put the refutation on his or her behalf. Some courts went even further and spread the rule number 1, which has to do with no responsibility of the editors or internet media, to the internet sites which are not registered as mass media. That is, to any media site owner, saying that he or she or it should not be responsible for any defamatory statements if they are part of the comments online. And in quite a number of cases, to my surprise, the courts basically said, as there is rule number 5, that comments on forums are totally outside of the jurisdiction of civil cases, and they would not ever take such cases for consideration because the comments have immunity from any civil procedures on defamation. That's in brief what I wanted to make out of the case law, and thank you.
So just to confirm, that final rule suggests that you can say whatever you like on a forum.
Yes.
And how does it define forum? Is that comments under an article?
That part of the website which is open to anyone, either to registered guest or non-registered guest, to leave comments on any subject, or basically on the subject of the contents on the website.
So what sense do you have that this sort of case law, these standards that have emerged in Russia are the same or different from what's going on elsewhere? Does this make Russia an outlier as far as you know?
Well, my knowledge is limited, and I don't think, I have not met any top court decisions on comments online in any other country. I know that, I mean, although civil law is basically the same in continental Europe, but I think that to some extent Russian courts and Russian judges, guided by this resolution of the Supreme Court, are treated in a very, very liberal way, maybe even more liberal than they should do, I mean, at least from the strictly judicial point of view.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to turn to Sarah now, Sarah Yassin, from Index on Censorship, which is a free speech organization, a civil rights group. To what extent do you think that news organizations have a sort of responsibility to defend the right of their users to say unfashionable or perhaps even irritating things?
I think that when we do think about comments on news websites, I think there's sort of this kind of collective clenching. You know, kind of the first thing we think about is kind of the sort of negative comments that, you know, we see, or I guess negative might be a light way to describe them sometimes. But I think that newspapers, when they do open up comments pages, I think that they really need to think about what they're trying to achieve. They are putting themselves in a position where there are less degrees of separation between them and their own audiences. And I think that there is a fantastic opportunity with that. I think that even though we like to think about the negative things first, that kind of, those pedantic people that do comment on every single article, sometimes those are the people that are holding those newspapers accountable for the kind of, maybe for what they're putting up, if there's something that might have a factual error. It's important to kind of have that, have people have that opportunity to respond. I mean, as far as, you know, newspapers protecting the right of users to kind of say negative things, I think that it really just depends on what they want to achieve with it. If it's to create good dialogue and debate around a certain subject, then that needs to be clearly defined in their moderation rules and their community guidelines. I think that the red line for me personally is if they're removing stuff simply because it doesn't go with what public opinion is or it's critical of what the article is. I think that it's ridiculous to remove a comment for that reason. But if a website has a guideline that says, for example, hate speech is not acceptable, then that's absolutely fine. Then you remove those kinds of comments. So I think that it's just about really being hands-on and working with users to get the best kind of conversation going.
Given that I'm going to put words in your mouth and assume that you like to see lots of debate in lots of places from lots of people, are there occasions when you would suggest that news sites decide not to host comments?
I think that's tough to say. I mean, I would say that, I think that you shutting down the community, kind of that option, it's, I think it's an interesting thing, and I'm sure you'll talk about this later because you kind of are in a better position to talk about that. But from where I'm standing, I think that, again, it boils down to moderation. So I think that there really isn't a situation where you should shut it down entirely. I think that you should try to do what you can to bring up the level of the conversation and to kind of keep it on track.
Do you have strong feelings about how sites should moderate their comments? Are some means of moderation preferential to others from your perspective?
I think that the way that news sites moderate, I think that's not as interesting to me as much as the kinds of measures that they'll put in place to kind of control the quality. I'm a massive advocate for allowing users to be anonymous. I don't think that encouraging things like registration systems or using Facebook, I don't think that that's what brings up the quality of a conversation. I think that it's again actually engaging with the people that are responding to an article. So I was speaking to someone earlier and they were saying that they'd looked into it and that there was this study where they'd found that the best conversations online were the ones where the journalists that wrote the pieces were actually engaging with the users and actually kind of commenting on that. And I think you do find that the first comments are the ones that set the tone for the rest of the kind of the debate, and I think that's very important.
I would love now to go to Mina to tell us about how things are managed at Aftenposten in Norway. What challenges have you faced, Mina?
Well, the last 2 years has been a strange period of time for us because in Russia and in the Baltic states you might have problem with the government. That's not the case in Norway. The Norwegian government clearly respects the freedom of the media, but 19 months ago I was at work, it was a summer day, and suddenly there was a huge explosion close by and the whole building was shaking. And we quite fast discovered that something was really wrong. We heard from colleagues that the government building was attacked, and I ran home to my children and I just kept following the news online on social media and on TV for the rest of the evening and during the night. And late that night, we discovered that the terror attacks, the terrorists had the manifesto that he wrote was starting to circulate on the internet. And we could see on the way that he distributed it that he had been quite some time on the internet. It was zipped in a specific way and was distributed to many users. And we certainly right away started to research his name, and it was also quite clear that he had considerable internet presence on different kind of forums, extremist sites, but also on normal news sites. And in his manifesto, Anders Behring Breivik, he wrote that he was part of a terror network and he was part of one cell, but that there was more. And during those days, we didn't know if there might be others around using the internet to mobilize more attacks. And we knew that he had been commenting on in our newspaper as well. So this was a Friday afternoon. On Saturday, I closed down our forum. Wasn't even a programmer around, so I kind of redirected all the traffic to an article I wrote. And I started pre-moderating all comments on our site. That was what we did immediately. The forum, we had really decided before this to close it down because it was 10 years old and social media is kind of taken over its position. And then after a period of time, it was clear that he was alone. It was clear that there wouldn't be another attack, and it was clear that he was behind bars and would be prosecuted. And we opened up our comments again to post-moderation like we had before, and so did most of the other newspapers in Norway. Just a few weeks later, it was more or less back to normal. But it was a quite intense reminder that what happens in these forums aren't always just opinions. There are actually mobilizing groups that are hateful, that could use violence, and there are problems relating to a complete free speech on a news website like ours. And so what has happened later is quite interesting because many Swedish newspapers has closed down a lot of their readers' engagement, but the Norwegians have not. I don't know why. I think the Swedes were following us closely, and I don't know why they have an even stricter system than we do right now. But it was a lesson to be learned for us. I love readers' comments. I've worked with it for 10 years, and I still love them. But a person's freedom of expression is does not mean that I'm obligated to publish it. And that's my view of it now. And we moderate quite hard. We moderate all swearing, racism, hatred, and also if people act poorly towards each other, we remove it. But still, it's hard, and I'm not sure we found the right model yet. We're still working on it.
I presume that a time of national crisis of the type that occurred during the Breivik attacks is the kind of time when a country needs its newspapers most, and presumably the kind of time when people most want to take advantage of the opportunity to ask each other what's going on. So what were the reasons for wanting to shut your forum during that time? What was the thought process that said we must not allow comments for the next 2 weeks?
Well, our forum was not really very well moderated. It was just tested sometimes, so we didn't read it all. And we knew actually after a short period of time that he had been active there, the terrorist, Anders Behring Breivik. We needed to. The police was asking us all kinds of questions and wanting to have the data and stuff, and we didn't really know what went on in there. And we couldn't really deal with it. And, but our readers' comments is really important, and we decided very soon that it was even more important then, because many people in Norway were afraid after the terror attacks, and they were afraid that they would never voice their opinion again. They were afraid that since they were anti-immigrant, they wouldn't be allowed to say it anymore. Now every kind of discussion like that would be shut down. So I made a huge effort to keep those discussions open, actually. And during the summer and the autumn, I personally moderated lots of them and sat there during the night to watch them, to make sure that we did have the difficult discussions open as well. So we made an effort, actually, to do that. And it was important in the period after the terror attacks. Because, yeah.
So what is your process for moderating comments now? How much work and effort goes into monitoring the discussions?
Well, we have in some sections we have Facebook comments, but that's basically on the youth and the sports stuff. And then on all political and news stuff, we have discussed, this
yes, quite.
third party.
This is a third party system, yeah.
And I have moderators working for us. They moderate 24 hours a day, post-moderation. They're supposed to look through everything within an hour. And on sensible subjects, I tend to moderate myself. And I also, if someone wants to complain, they can come to me and I'll reply and look into it. And sometimes I undo what the moderators do.
So the idea is that you read everything that is
Yes.
posted. You don't wait for readers to point out to you that this bit or that bit is a problem.
No, we read everything.
Because there's a sense in Britain that if you, I mean, a lot of the legal area around comments remains grey because the case law is not full. But there's a sense in Britain, certainly, that if the more of your comments you read, the more liability you take on. Because once you read a comment as a journalist, decide that it's okay and leave it up there, you know that it's there, and if it then proves to be defamatory or in some other way breaks acceptable laws, then it needs to come down. You don't worry about that.
Now, we've had the same judicial discussions in Norway, and the editors are still debating it. But my newspaper is kind of a serious newspaper, more like the broadsheets, and we kind of want to take this kind of responsibility because for our profile, it wouldn't look good if things were unmoderated and just looked completely crap compared to the articles that we print. So for us, it's a choice. It's not like we say we have legal responsibility of everything. We don't claim we do, but we want it as we see it as a part of our news operation, and we want them to be good.
And have you got into legal difficulties over comments?
I've just worked with it in this newspaper for about 2 years, and no, not to my knowledge during those we have complaints, and sometimes complaints via lawyers, and we look into it and we erase it, and sometimes we need to go into discussions with people, but I think we sorted everything out.
Do you feel there's a sense also that the current legal environment often encourages newspapers to over-moderate? So, for example, at The Economist, if there is a claim that a comment is defamatory, it is often easier to take it down first and worry about it later because that reduces your liability. Now, that's something that many journalists feel iffy about because ideally we would leave a comment up until it was proved to be defamatory, but then the liability is larger. Do you worry about those kinds of issues as well, or is it clearer for you?
Yes, I do personally, because in Norway there's an elite discourse that kind of trashes the comments all the time. They're not good enough, they're just crap, they're ruining the public discourse. I don't agree with that. It's an important outlet for many, many people, and we have to fight that all the time. And, but it does affect you. And if a professor, an important professor, says, this is crap, this is terrible, how could they leave this? It's easy to just erase it really fast and try to make it go away. It's a good point you make there.
Irsta, can I ask you, how do you moderate comments? Do you read everything? Do you wait for readers to tell you things are bad, or do you just let it all go?
I wanted to add that I didn't know I didn't know any news website which editors want to have an insulting comments in its site. We all are trying to find the way and encourage people to express their opinion in an ethical way and to discuss correctly. And in Lithuania we have a post-moderation. We have a special comments editors whose job is to sit and read all the comments and to erase these which are threatening, which are hurting, and so on and so on. And but it's very hard to read everything because I just wanted to ask the colleague in Norway how many comments do the biggest news websites have per day, because in Lithuania we have 10,000 more comments per day, so it's very hard to read all of them. But of course we know the most actual subjects on that people react very how to say, in very hot way. So we try first of all to moderate, to pre-moderate comment, post-moderate comment on that issues, but we try to read all the comments as much as possible. Also, we have tools for readers. We ask them just inform the editorial staff about the horrible comments. But interesting thing we found out when we had this button on our comment site, most readers inform the editorial about the comments, which most often when we see are about they think that the comments should be taken off these which print the opinion. They disagree, but not the comments which are really hateful or so on and so on. So we check all the time what readers tell us. So we ask readers to inform us about the hateful speech. We post-moderate by special editors the comment sites.
And can I ask you, what are the most common reasons why either of you would delete comments from the website? What is it that's causing your moderators to take things down?
Bad language is one, and very harsh comments on ethnic groups, I'd say, was the other.
What are the main reasons we are taking off? In Lithuania, all news websites have commenting rules, and they post it on their websites, and they say, inform readers that if you invite to do harm to other people, if you will be not tolerant for minorities and so on, we will take off your comments.
Well, I can tell you that the most common reason for deleting comments on The Economist is actually simply because they're spam. That gives you an example. Far more than any other kind of abuse. It's just the sorry business of removing advertising from the site that takes up most of our moderators' time. We have spoken enough for now. It's time to open the debate to the floor. I hope you'll have some questions and some comments. Please do keep them concise. Commonly at The Economist, my beautiful copy is cut in half by my editors, and it always hurts, and the article is almost always better as a result. So please, I'm going to hold you to the same standards. But thank you. If you would, when you make your comment, stand up, tell us who you are and where you're from, and also wait for the microphone or nobody will hear you. And let's start here.
Hello, Flutur Akusare. I represent Balkan Investigative Report Network.
Could you talk a little bit louder, please?
Hi. Okay. I'm Flutur Akusare. I represent Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. We do have a news website, and the way we moderate comments is that we read all the comments as you do, and in two cases we delete or we edit the comments. One when there are defamatory or false statements that we cannot prove, and the second when there is hate speech. But I have a question for Sarah Jessen. Tell me, how do you think we should deal with these cases? For example, if we receive comments which are defamatory or hate speech, and having in mind that you love comments and people speaking online, how do you think we should deal with these comments? Thanks.
I think that it's important for a website to be clear about what kind of comments they'll delete within their moderation guidelines. I think it's completely acceptable to delete comments that violate a certain set of guidelines, because I mean, you know, complaining about all of the immigrants in an article about, you know, oranges is probably not a very good, you know, a very good thing to keep up. So I think that that's completely fine. I think that the one thing that does bother me when we start talking about moderation on websites, you know, we are talking just about setting the parameters, and I think that we don't think about how do we best set this up to not only keep the speech at a high quality, but also to give people the tools to be able to challenge these kinds of mentalities that might be coming to life within comment system. I mean, the thing is, racism, bigotry, you know, homophobia, these things aren't new. You know, these things have been there for ages. And actually commenting systems and really the online world, it gives us an opportunity to really challenge that kind of mentality head on. And we need to really empower people to be able to do that. And, you know, commenting on news sites, it's a completely new medium for us. You know, we're still learning how to use it. And I think that we need to think about it in less scary terms. It's not actually as, you know, scary and Wild West as we think it is. You know, it's not much different than, say, how we set up this discussion in this room. This discussion would look differently if we had, you know, chairs sitting in a circle and, you know, each person had, you know, an opportunity to say something. You know, these are the kinds of things that really dictate how a conversation looks.
And I should add that something that made a big difference to the way that The Economist comments worked was not too long ago adding the reply feature to comments. That's a very basic feature these days, but we went years without allowing readers to reply to each other. And these days, when we see poor comments or angry comments or hateful comments or just plain incorrect comments, the most heartening thing is to immediately see the rest of our commenting community replying to those comments and engaging those people in debate and often putting them correct on the things that they said which was wrong. And that is a sign, I think, of what news organizations can offer, this place for debate where wrongs are righted. And, but for that to happen, you need to moderate lightly rather than too hard. More questions?
Thank you. I'm Guy Berger from UNESCO. I understand that in Norway, some of the newspapers decided after the Andreas Breivik massacre that they would require all commenters to identify themselves. Can you tell us what the thinking was and how widespread that was and what the effect was?
Well, there has been experiments and a lot of discussion, but basically not very many did change. What we see is that quite a lot of news organizations has moved to the Facebook commenting system, which basically is full name commenting system. And it's an easy way, and I mean, everyone's on Facebook. I don't like it very much myself, but actually, there wasn't very many who radically changed this just because of the terror. There's been a bigger difference after the terror in Swedish media, actually. Many closed down their comments, and many changed their system. You should look into it. It's quite interesting.
Do you regret the lack of anonymity, the loss from things like Facebook comments?
Yes, I myself, I favor the possibility of being anonymous. And I don't think the quality of discussion is about being anonymous or not.
Because lots of people are saying the main reason for Facebook comments is because named commenters behave better. That's not your experience.
Well, yes, I think they restrict themselves more. But in my experience, the quality of the conversation is not much better with Facebook comments, no.
Back to the floor. Did you?
My name is Wenzel Michalski. Hi, I'm from Human Rights Watch. I found your presentation, Andrew Richter, very surprising, and I don't want to challenge you on this for now, that the Russian media law is liberal, even maybe too liberal, as you said. I just don't want to leave it unmentioned that in the last decade, 17 journalists were murdered in Russia, and not one gunman or one mastermind was put to justice. So liberal laws, you know, don't matter if there are no consequences.
Well, you would agree that they were murdered not because of comments online, definitely. And this session is about comments online and not about the safety of journalists. If you invite me for a presentation on safety of journalists in Russia, you would hear a different report. So.
We've got a comment at the front. Okay, and then we'll come down here, if you will.
My name is Dumitru Čurić. I come from Republic of Moldova. You talked about comments on the website. This year we discovered a new type of comments, and I would like to hear your opinion about them. We've tracked some groups of visitors, and we've come to the conclusions that there were organized groups paid by politicians to promote subjects, make organized diversions in the commentaries. We have such a political situation that we're in a kind of electoral campaign for about 4 years, so it's very competing about this thing. we've decided to track these groups and delete their comments, even if they don't contain hate speech. We just mark them as spam, that they want to take the agenda of the subjects, get it into another point. What's your opinion about this? Thank you.
First of all, how do you identify them, if I may ask? How do you know? Because, I mean, how do you tell them apart from genuine political speech, which is the last thing you probably want to cull?
So our technical team worked about 2 months and reached the conclusions that all the commentaries they are registered on our website from the same email server with the same IP address, and they promote the same message. Sometimes it's the same commentaries as some political analysts that favor one politician. So we've tracked all this. Actually, there are 2 groups, 2 main political parties that promote messages. And we don't want our forum to be used by political or by politicians for promoting their point of view. But we are sure they are paid, because we have some inside info that they have offices with 10 people staying on forums and commenting.
Can I comment on this? It's very interesting what you found out. My first response was, why don't you publish it? We did. Yeah. And how did the other commenters react?
They know this. Everybody knows this. And that's why we let them, because they are useless for the discussion.
And do your readers agree with you?
Yes.
Okay. So you couldn't just label them or something?
We try to do that, but they try to trick the system all the time. We block them, then they choose other emails from where they register and continue to do the same thing. So we have a person that blocks them all the time. So we have about 3 months blocking. I think we have more than 10,000 users blocked, but they are the same.
You know what I would do? I would invite them to a meeting, and I'd say, you're welcome to comment, but you have to use your name, and you have to state who you're working for. I mean, you can discuss in the open if you're discussing as part of this political campaign, but elsewhere we'll block you.
I think that this kind of a thing is really interesting because I actually do a lot of work on Bahrain for Index, and they actually they are whizzes at bringing in PR companies to really bring out the voice of the people that like advocating for against burning tires and those kinds of things. And I think that publishing that kind of information is the right way to go because, that needs to be exposed. I mean, I think that going online, the terms change completely. But I think that the positive side of all of this is that I think that commenting systems and really the online world, it's giving us better BS detectors. I'm not going to curse on a panel, but it gives us an ability, I think, to really be more skeptical. And I think that that's something. This was brought up in the hate speech panel that you need more critical thinking, and I think that's absolutely important. I think that before I became a very active internet user, I think when I was a kid, I would see something in a newspaper and I'd accept that as fact. I would say, this is fact. This is in a newspaper. It says the New York Times at the top. It can't be wrong, and I think that that's something we need to be skeptical of, and I hope that we become more skeptical as we start to become more savvy online users.
I just wanted to add, I always say that people have a sixth feeling. They recognize what opinions are real and what are bought for certain opinion. And they do not react to this. If these people who may specially write some special opinions for money, they write to the editorial staff, for example, in the Baltic Sea and say, these are spammers, can you take them out because they disturb us? They do not react to the not true opinions. So I always say that it is not a problem because people they recognize where true opinions and where not.
Hi, I'm Joe McNamee from European Digital Rights. I had a few brief comments on Facebook logins. I think I agree with everyone who spoke. It's having European media outlets requiring citizens to be part of an American social network, which makes its money out of profiling personal data in order to access specific political discussions is an astoundingly bad idea. But we all seem to be in agreement on that. I was kind of amused by the comment you referred to somebody saying if a comment said that something was crap. And you also said that your commenting section would not allow swearing. Well, insofar as swearing as crap is swearing, a transcript of what you said would not be allowed on your own website. Nor indeed would BS, because Facebook, for example, banned an Irish village called Effin because it was a euphemism for something else. The actual original point that I wanted to make was about it's okay if a news outlet bans hate speech. Well, okay, but is that bans what is prohibited by law or bans what the outlet thinks is prohibited by law? Because you end up in an ever-decreasing circle. If you want your comment to stay online, you have to self-censor based on what you think the news outlet might think that a court might think might be illegal. And on the other hand, maybe it's the newspaper's definition of hate speech. So I, for example, I absolutely hate people with single-gear bicycles in hilly cities. They're fashion victims, they're bloody stupid, and they should stop. Now, normally that wouldn't be hate speech, but maybe it would be hate speech if the journalist or the person checking the article happened to be one of these blasted fashion victims. Whose definition is basically the question.
I think that's a really excellent point, and I think it's something, for me that I, really struggle with, and I think that that's where it becomes really important to emphasize, number one, a case-by-case kind of scenario, and number two, that that the actual kind of moderation system can be held accountable. So if someone, let's say, explosive topic off the top of my head, gay marriage, right? If someone feels like their opinion was censored because someone else decided that they thought it was hate speech, then they should be able to challenge that. I think that is something that someone should be able to do. So I think that it's important to not be very flat about the way that we kind of look at these things.
A typical comment. I think there's hardly any comment that would be judged in the Norwegian judicial system anymore for racism, or it's hardly. I mean, it's not really common law anymore. What I would remove would probably be comments like, no Muslim can live in Europe, they live in the Middle Ages, and they abuse their women. This is a kind of comment that you find regularly. It's not illegal, but it's crude, and in my opinion, it prevents the Muslim Norwegian population from participating. If you have a lot of this, it really narrows down the discussion to basically a few very hateful individuals, and all the others disappear. So the fact is that if you allow a lot of this, all the others disappear from the discussion, and a lot of reasonable people won't take part. So what is censoring? I mean, and this is not illegal to say in Norway, but I won't allow it in my newspaper. I won't.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Rapos Guri. I am from the University of Tirana. Well, as far as I noticed, most of the people here are speakers are lawyers, so they tend to argue how the law and the state can control media. But if you ask the journalists here, for sure they will say that, and they will insist that we should find the ways how to self-regulate the online media. Regarding this self-regulation of online media or of comments in online media, we have 3 experiences in our country. The first one and the worst one is there are some websites, they are posting everything. They are leaving free posting. Okay, so this is the worst. I'm not discussing this because in this case, even the self-regulation is missing. But we have 2 other experiences. The second one is there are a group of websites. They have set a rule that they will post the comments within 48 hours. I would kindly ask Mina, how do they solve this dilemma? Because there are a lot of visitors who don't like that their comment to be posted after 48 hours. They immediately they leave. So is there any important role of the speed of the posting of the comments?
Well, this is a problem of pre-moderation, obviously. It takes too long, and it's really very outdated in a way. I just had a new huge discussion in Norway where everyone was demanding pre-moderation again. The only way to solve it is to have moderators working 24 hours, reading everything immediately. It's very costly. It's very costly. And in my opinion, pre-moderation is not ideal, but if you have to, maybe in some circumstances you have to, but it is very, very costly to hinder the delays that everyone hates.
Yes, and especially if part of what you're trying to do on a news website is to engender conversation between people rather than just responses to an article. If you feel like you're required to wait a day before you get your response published, then a conversation becomes very long and very boring. And I think pre-moderation can significantly hinder any website's attempt at building a valuable community. But thankfully there are options, and it sounds like, just to sum up what we've heard from the panel on this, that most of you are attempting to post-moderate, which means you're attempting to read everything that's published after. Now, I have a hunch that if your sites continue to grow in the way that I presume you want them to, you're going to get to a stage where even that stops being something that's feasible, in that you'll have so many comments you won't be able to read every one. Are you happy to then move to, I guess the other solution is what they call report moderation, which is where you only look at things that are reported to you by your readers? Is that something you assume that you'll be doing sooner or later?
I don't think so, because we might go on and have a paid content model online, and that might reduce actually the number of comments. We'll see. Many newspapers kind of going in the direction of the New York Times, a lot of experimenting going on, so we might actually reduce the traffic than the other way around.
You're not planning a paywall?
No, we are not planning. We are not discussing about this plan because we think that not big experience showed that people won't pay for content online. Because you can always find these who will produce you news for free. But we see another trend. We see the trend that a lot of news websites, they encourage people and ask their readers, like us in Facebook, like us on Twitter, like us on Google+, be our friend, be with us in the social media, which is very popular nowadays, and that every person lives not only real life, but a virtual life all the time. And we see the trend that the comments are delivering on two sides. People more and more are commenting actual articles and actual topics on the Facebook profiles, on the public Facebook profiles of the media. So this is the trend that may reduce the importance of readers' comments on the websites themselves. The platform may go to the social networks. That's the trend we see now. We do not know yet how it will be in the future, but now we see this trend.
Does that matter to you as a business?
Yes, of course. That's why all news website goes to their important with their profiles, and they deliver news on the social networks. Because as I'm talking with other news portals, editors, we all see the trend that readers are coming to the news websites when they see links of an actual articles on the social network. So we, as business model, we see that we shall produce not news on our websites, but we shall produce our news on the social networks also.
But surely as the conversation moves to the social networks, your ability to influence it in ways that you think are good through your choice of moderation is limited, because once the conversation is happening on Facebook or on Google, the people who finally decide what gets published and what doesn't get published are those American firms, not yourself.
You know, when the discussion takes place on the social network, it is people, it's like live, how to say, live discussion without our moderation. They debate through themselves, but the thing we see, it depends how do they debate. If they debate on the special profile of the media, we can moderate the discussion, because we own this profile and we can, how to say, make a little control.
We have 1 or 2 more minutes left. Let's try and get another question from the floor. One at the front here.
Hello, my name is Sonia Kelly, and I work at Freedom House. Freedom House, who, if some of you may not know, tracks the state of internet freedom around the world on an annual basis. And one thing that we have seen in our research is that in more and more countries, it's actually the website owners and webmasters that are being held liable legally for comments being posted by their users. And we've seen that in places like Thailand, Vietnam, Venezuela, and so forth, including some countries of the OSCE region. And the effect that this has had practically is that in some of these countries, we are actually seeing online newspapers or web or similar outlets actually closing down their commenting sections, because they really do not want to face penalties, which are really, really high in some of these environments. For example, in Thailand, you can actually go to prison for up to 10 years if, for example, you as website moderator do not remove comment that's critical of the monarchy. Also within the OSCE region, for example, there's a lot of legal ambiguity with new Hungarian media law in terms of how comments will be treated. So just based on the experience of the panelists, Mark, you mentioned, for example, with The Economist, you guys tend to remove comments because of this fear of legal liability. I'm curious whether in the UK case, whether there is actual case law where media outlets have been held legally liable, and whether that's part of the reason why that is being done. And then also a question for Aiste. You mentioned the very important case in Estonia and the issue of liability as well. And I'm curious what kind of effect has that had in real life on online moderators and media outlets when it comes to comments. Thanks.
That's an excellent question. And I think the representatives of our panel have largely said that in their countries, the case law is in their favor. But of course, I'm sure if we have panelists from many other places, they would say a very different story. And liability, legal liability, is a massive issue for intermediaries, not just Facebook and Google, but for all the news sites that we know and love. As for The Economist and in Britain, well, I tend to refer those legal questions to our lawyers. I am no expert. The case law is in our favor. There is very little of it. we are unlikely to be held liable for comments on our site unless they are clearly law-breaking and we know about them and we decide to leave them up. The issue I mentioned, which I first heard articulated by Cory Doctorow, which is a good point, that when moderators of websites are most busy with removing comments, that's when they are most likely to, on the whole, err on the side of caution, which means that lots of good comments can be taken down. There are some efforts in Britain to change this. There is a update to the defamation bill, which is slowly working its way through the Houses. And the idea of that is that news sites would be largely granted immunity for the comments that are left on their site, provided they make it clear on their website that the comment is under some form of discussion, and potentially make it easier for the person who has a complaint about defamation to reach the individual who made the original comment, to come to some kind of agreement with those people. The worry there, of course, is that that might end up encouraging sites to collect more data from their users and be more prepared to hand it over if that means that they are assured their own liability. And I think that is still a question that's under discussion. And I personally would congratulate the politicians who are working on it, because it's an issue that needs to be dealt with, but it needs to be dealt with very sensitively because it's quite complicated.
I want to say that the case in Estonia is really important for us, because we want to know the final solution of the court, and now we think our position is that every user is responsible for what he says in the public sphere. Not media is responsible for the information or opinion a person takes. Media is only the platform, the place where we come to discuss. It's the same social network like Facebook, like Twitter, only we are discussing not with our friends or on the subject in the media. So we went to the Human Rights Court, and we are waiting for the solution, because nothing's changed in the Estonian or Baltic states news websites. They all still are operating with the anonymous comments, and they didn't change something in their work. We are just now waiting for the main solution, and we'll see what to do further.
I'm afraid I have broken the first law of moderation, which is to let a panel overrun, and the second law, which is especially to let it overrun when there's a reception awaiting you. So I will call this panel to a close. I'd like to thank my panelists for their contributions, and I'd like to thank you for sitting through them and for posing such excellent questions. Thank you to all, and I hope you enjoy the reception that comes later. Thank you.
Thanks.